time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubt and out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold and own it. Never let go, stand tall and hold tight. Overcoming obstacles is the objective in life. Doubters all the night, and onto them you shine bright. Cause inside your head, on goes the light. Ignite, fight for intuition upon the stars in the night that glisten. To you they listen, to be you instead of the wishing. When your time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubt and out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold and own it. When your time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubt and out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold and own it. Never let go, stand tall and hold tight. Overcoming obstacles is the objective in life. Never let go, stand tall and hold tight. Overcoming obstacles is the objective in life. Doubters all the night, and onto them you shine bright. Cause inside your head, on goes the light. Doubters all the night.
Now my father died in a bottle. And on his dying bed, the very last words he had to say to me, the last words I would ever hear, he sought absolution from me. He was saying to me, Joy, tell me it was worth it to give up my manhood for you. Tell me that it was worth it. Make me feel whole. My father wasn't whole. He died not feeling whole because his manhood was robbed from him, and he wanted to believe it was worth it by looking at me. Now that wasn't some many years ago. That was 1991. I want to read this because I think it speaks to the assault in a very, very good way. During slavery, so now we know what the trip over was like. Let's look at to understand that slavery is the antithesis of what it means to feel human. It is not a normal process for a human being to be in bondage for the rest of their lives. Period. When we discuss living enslaved, we are discussing only degrees of abuse. I have actually heard people attempt to justify slavery by arguing that many slaves didn't have it so bad. They claim some were even treated extremely well and were better off than people who were destitute and left to their own devices. Now, this has to do with poverty. You had something called Elizabethan poor laws. This is when Europeans, and if you really want to understand this, you have to understand what Europeans did to Europeans. And anyone that was poor was considered immoral, irreligious, and they were often imprisoned for being poor. And that's where you got something called able-bodied. If you were able-bodied, then you had no reason. If you had an able body, there was something called deserving poor, right? So there are obviously those who didn't deserve anything that were poor. I mean, the whole idea that these people were indentured to keep them spiritually okay. The notion was that this was spiritually important for these people. Poor people were irreligious people, is what was believed. And that's amazing when you consider religion and what we're supposed to do as religious people as it relates to the poor. All I can say is that these people are among the worst of hypocrites, for who among them would willingly give up their freedom under any conditions? Once again, let me be perfectly clear about this. Slavery by its very nature is abusive and abhorrent to the human spirit. It was no accident that the state of New Hampshire adopted as its motto, live free or die. Freedom means that much to all of us. It is detestable that constitutions were written and laws enacted to develop and maintain the institution of slavery. Slaves had not even the simplest of human rights. How many of you are familiar with the Casual Killing Act? Now, the Casual Killing Act was written so that if in the correcting of a slave, the slave was killed during that correction, it was not accounted a felony, but they were acquitted of all wrongdoing as if such act had never occurred. Casual Killing Act. Well, why would you have to beat a slave so badly? Well, you couldn't find them because they had no money. And if you jailed them, their labor was lost to you. So you beat them severely, and so severely sometimes you killed them. And do understand that women beat their slaves to death, many of them, not just the men. So I began to look at that and I started to try to understand how much, because see, you know how when you tell a lie, you try to keep it going? And you forget what you lied about, you know, because it becomes a mess. So when we start trying to cover up this horrible deed, it gets more complex. We have to write constitutions and laws. So you have to ask yourself this question. There's a book called Southern Slavery and the Law. And this book is that book right over, big thick book. All of that was about the laws that were created to maintain the institution of slavery. That's how complicated. Just same thing happened with apartheid. Part of what toppled apartheid was trying to maintain the separateness. It got insane. It became financially impossible. Too many toilets. Too many bathrooms. It got crazy. White, colored, you know, it got crazy. And to maintain the institution of slavery, you had to maintain laws and you had to also calm the mind, did you not? So let's calm the mind. So the first thing we have to do is make everybody feel okay about this thing called slavery, right? So remember I told you we have to up the ante and go to science? So now we have to understand they created laws so that if you killed black people, you haven't done anything wrong. Don't feel bad about that. Didn't you say we're just correcting him? Okay. You know, you can go home absolved of any wrongdoing because you were simply correcting him. There it is in the law. Are you following me? Okay, so now the law has protected me if I should kill him. So now let's just start kind of understanding how we have to now indoctrinate the country. We've got to indoctrinate everyone into this belief system, even you and I, friends. It had to come from somewhere. When I started walking around and hearing little children use as a way of cursing someone the color of their skin, you black, you nappy-headed, start thinking about it. Or when you start looking at and I want you to stay with me here because this gets real deep. When you start looking at people and how they get disciplined, you go to the South and start looking at how children get disciplined. Boy, go fetch me a few switches. I'm going to braid them together. I'm going to soak them in water. I'm going to have you pull your pants down, and I'm going to beat you. Does that sound like something that might have came from somewhere else? Think about it. And after a while, we begin to normalize that behavior, but you got to understand where it came from. That's a whip. And I'm going to make you go get it. I want you to begin to understand that we got to be careful about what we call cultural. We got to be careful about that. So now when we begin to look at that, truly, and the reason it's not an indictment, it's an understanding of how we've never been able to heal. Because through this whole process, first of all, you can't even talk about it. We can't even talk about it as though it didn't happen. 246 official years. And if you want to topple that and look a little further, it didn't end when it ended. So when we look at these behaviors, when in there, I always ask, because I'm sure that maybe someone in the audience knows something I don't know. Do you remember the free therapy? Anybody? Surely somebody here remembers the lines or something. Where the sign up was, you put your X and you can come get the therapy because we treated you really badly. You don't remember that? None of it ever happened, did it? That makes us an incredible people, doesn't it? Really, when you start doing the math on this, it's amazing. It's amazing what we've been able to do. So let's look at what they did to calm the mind on a more pervasive level. So when you begin to look at the statutes, every state had its statute around casual killing and how often you could, beat them and all whatever. But let's look at now, this is how it morphs into something else. This is when it becomes part of your consciousness, gets slid, it slides on in there without you knowing it. Often I read this, but it's very important because it becomes the foundation of the scientific community's justification of slavery. Carl von Linnaeus, who lived 1707 to 1778, developed a taxonomic system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. This gentleman is a father of anthropology. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists refer to Linnaeus' taxonomy in his Systema Naturae of 1735 as the first modern study of man. 1735. We're now trying to understand or categorize, classify human beings. And they'll say, although color classification dated back to the ancient Egyptians, I want you to pay attention to that. We go, why don't they want to ever attribute to Africa, Egypt? Why don't they let us have Egypt? Because we do have it, Egypt. Why won't they let us have it? Because when we look at the knowledge base that was there, that emerged from there, the civilization that emerged from there, case in point, when I was going to go for my final exams in my psychology program, ultimately you have to take the Hippocratic Oath, okay? Now, when I first entered my physiology of the brain, neurophysiology class, I walked into the class. It was a big, thick book. If it fell on you, it would kill you, right? It's a medical book because this was a medical aspect of what I was to learn. And I'm thinking, Lord, I mean, all the people, big, thick glasses were sitting in the front, you know, the class. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have to take it twice, I'm sure. Certain of it, right? So I'm sitting in the class, and I'm looking at the book, big, giant, thick book. And I open the front page. It's a glossy picture, and I'm looking at the front page, and I look around, I'm going, I can read what's on the front page, and no one else in the class could read what was on the first page of the book because it was written in hieroglyphics, and I can read basic hieroglyphics, and it said brain. And I'm like, whoa, it says brain in hieroglyphics on the front page of my neurophysiology book. I'm pretty excited. Now I'm thinking maybe I could take it once. So I opened the front page, and there is a glossy picture that was found in one of the tombs of the first ever recorded brain surgery. You know, and they're showing you the drilling, the hole in, and the whole thing. And this is interesting because this is the front page. But when I graduate, I have to take what oath? The Hippocratic Oath. Because Hippocrates was what? The father of? I have a problem, don't you? Imhotep is the father of medicine. Not only that, it's no secret because you can't hide a pyramid, yes? He built the Giza step pyramids. So are we confused? I want you to understand how deep this stuff is. Then they'll go, well, now we got the first recorded brain surgery, which predates this man. Well, we're going to say that he's a father of modern medicine. Okay. Well, why are we still giving an oath to him? It becomes a thing where you have to question the psychology of it. And I'm saying they're showing me the truth and daring me to question it. Daring me to question it. I sat down, and I know I had, when I mentioned this because it astounds me, this particular one. When I ask everyone to tell me the continents, and I don't care what you say about this, tell me how many continents there are. People tell me there's 7. But before we can tell somebody there's 7 continents, we've got to tell you what a continent is. They give you the definition. A large landmass, partly or completely surrounded by water. So we talk about Africa. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. North America, South America, you name them all. You start looking at, Antarctica, Australia. It's all making sense. Then you get to Europe. Europe is neither large nor surrounded by water. It's a peninsula. But wait, people look at that and go, what do you know? Yeah, you get children, they take a test, let them not put Europe on there. You've given them the rule, you've told them what it is a bald-faced lie, and we still do it. Then you decide to name a continent Eurasia. Why would you name the whole continent based on a peninsula? Even if you want to tag it on, why would you call it Eurasia? We did it. We looked at it, we read it, we understood the process of what defines it, and we wrote it down. That is how deeply ingrained the pathology is to remove the dissonance. And we can't give you Egypt, because if we give you Egypt, then we're going to give you a level of intellectual capacity that we have deemed you unfit to have. Okay, so I want you to understand the psychology that goes into this. It's not something, people look at it, they want to deny our kings and queens. They want to deny that it could be you. Because if I'm going to subjugate and oppress someone that I consider beneath me, how can we look at civilization so great and justify that behavior? You see, it starts messing with the math. So I'll just simply take it out of Africa. And we bought that too. No one stopped in the British Museum and said, excuse me, there's been a major error here. You know, you can't take Egypt out of Africa. You got to put it back in there where the African stuff is. Nobody questioned it because it fed on our need to remove all of the guilt associated and all of the doubt associated with what was going on. So let's see what else he said. While Linnaeus advanced classification with the use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his 4 families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus, okay, as reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by customs. That would be Native Americans. That would be the people we erased earlier. Homo europaeus, and I think white people ought to be bothered by this one. Homo europaeus as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo afer as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality traits, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. Zippity-doo-dah, none. In a book. And the bottom line is you've heard these things attributed to us. Let's move in on that word lazy. We built the country. And what we didn't do, the Chinese did and the natives did. We are lazy. We fed your babies. You couldn't even do that. But the problem is not that it's a lie, but that we buy it. We will buy that about ourselves. When you go to right now the burial ground, what was so phenomenal about what I learned about that burial ground was how hard people worked. There were stress injuries. In other words, a man about 6'5" would have an injury that would cause the muscle to detach itself from the bone as a result of exertion. Who works so hard that the muscle detaches itself from the bone? No human being does that willingly, but you will if you have a gun trained on you. And then they turn around and call you lazy. And then we begin to buy that imagery. We begin to believe that imagery, friends, and for years and years of hearing it, we begin to believe it. Just like we began to believe Europe was a continent. So what I'm saying to you, that these things were calculated to ease the mind, to remove the dissonance. But what it creates, what does a secret create? It creates pathology. Secrets are those things that make us all sick. Secrets are what release the poison that creates the boil. And so what we have to understand about this is not so much what it did to others, but what did that do to us? What did we come to believe about who we are? I'll tell you, it's the reason why we all go, I heard that somebody got shot on new news. That wasn't nobody black, was it? Oh, tell me that wasn't. Was he black? We start taking it on, right? Or we'll get in a room and we start having this discussion and someone white will get upset and someone black will stand up to protect them. Because we're so used to protecting white people from any discomfort. So when I began to look at the fear, I started to ask them, I said, what are you afraid of? And I had a white gentleman stand up in one of my classes and say, I'm afraid because I know that I have unearned privilege. And you ought to be mad about that. And so my assumption is that when you look at me, you see that. And that you might reflect that and maybe want to hurt me. And then, of course, everything I see on the news is that you are violent. For example, in the Rodney King riot, I remember looking at the statistics, based on what I understood about what was going on, and then what the news covered. The news made it a real black thing. 51% of the folks out on the street rioting were Latino. 51%. But it was a black thing. So we have to understand that and then I went further when I said about this fear thing. So I said, so let me get this right. You are afraid because you know you have unearned privilege. Yes, as a white male, I'm clear about that. I'm not proud of it. I'm not comfortable with it. And I sense agitation around that. I said, okay. I said, so now what do you think happens? Because when white people are afraid, folks get lynched. Okay, stuff gets real ugly when white people get afraid. So I really want to understand his answer. Because my son's life may stand in the balance of that answer. And what I came to understand, that when white people say in the audience, the one way that black people adversely impact the lives of white people is because we are afraid, then we have to understand what their solution to that is. And the solution is, you need to understand that I'm afraid of you because of my unearned privilege that you might be angry about, because I know you've been oppressed as a result of that privilege, but you need to take care of me so I can feel comfortable with it. So we all know what's going on, but I insist that you make me feel comfortable about my unearned privilege. Because that's what we're supposed to do, you see. Because then you wouldn't be afraid. So what I want to explain to you is that's how deep the pathology is. Oh my God, I'm feeling upset and a little guilty. There's got to be something wrong. What have you done? You need to stop. I think he needs to be removed from the room because I've become upset, because it is so unnatural an emotion for me to have, a discomfort. You need to be removed because you're making me uncomfortable. In other words, your presence and existence is a discomfort to me. Now, either you remove yourself or I will have you removed. That's the story. So let's move forward so that we can understand that, again, I didn't make it up, because it became now not only a part of the literature, it became the pictures. It became what we saw when we started to look at the minstrel shows. Remember the minstrel shows, what happened? All of the imagery that began to solidify those images of this shuffling, lazy, ignorant slave. To such a degree that we became embarrassed because we bought that the image was real. That's why we became ashamed of them. But we have to understand that nobody white looks at something someone else white does and takes all that on. They don't. It could be the president. And they'll tell you, well, he's a fool. I have nothing to do with me. I'm so embarrassed as a white person. They don't feel that. They go, there just goes another fool if they happen to have that particular perspective of it. You see what I'm saying? So but we take it on. Hence, anybody black, doesn't matter who they are, stands up and says something, we all buy it and own it and believe like we got to defend it. You know, somebody will ask me about, why did that black man have a tiger in his apartment? I go, what makes you think I know why he had a tiger in his apartment? Now, what's deep is some of us will try to answer that. That's outrageous. That's when we have to say, there's a fool. That's all that was, a fool. Don't have nothing to do with me. But we take it on because we have a collective injury, you see. And that's why when I talk about the transmission of post-traumatic slave syndrome, I tell you that it's transmitted. It's not enough to just deal with the family or the individual. You got to deal with the community because that's where it's reinforced, is it not? Here's where it is. So one of the things that I started to do, and understand that American chattel slavery ended, followed by peonage, unlawful selling of slaves into slavery, followed by black codes adopted by different states that says you can't come here even though you're free, north, south, east, west, don't matter, we don't want you. Sundown laws, right? Then we had convict lease laws where we arrested all of the beginning of, again, another fractioning, arresting all of these black men, principally, but not only black men, and imprisoning them with sentences that were, first of all, they were trumped up charges to begin with. And that's where overrepresentation started. Someone needs to do research on that alone to understand what was the impact of convict leasing on present-day overrepresentation of African Americans in the criminal justice system. There is a direct link. I can't do all that research, but do you see what I'm saying? We need to do it because the link, it's a natural line. They said it worked then, it'll work now. The only thing we got to do is get them to buy it. So they show you criminality over and over again to the extent that we're afraid of us. To the point where we begin to think that we're violent, horrible people. And so then when the bill gets passed, we sign our people away. We do it. And they say, they did it. They did it. Do you see what I'm saying? We need to take a look at that. There's research that needs to be done there. I did some research on that, but I can't do all of it. So we have to begin to look at those behaviors and those kinds of things that produce this. So when I say that it moves from the individual, family, community, it's reinforced over and over again. We all never got in a room and talked about it, but we have the same wounds. When I was on Gil Noble's show, what I found out was we have the same stories. If I had an open mic today and put it right there in front, every one of you could get up and tell a story that we could all relate to, couldn't you? But let me tell you something, when white people hear us, they go, I think you're exaggerating. That person just probably had a bad day that day. It had nothing to do with your race. But what if they heard an audience full of people, 2004, say, yes, it did. And if you don't believe his story, let me tell you my story and her story and his story. We ain't making it up. This is not a figment of our imagination. It's alive and well and killing us today. That's real. So what does it look like transmitted from one group to the next? And this is an interesting dynamic because we do it. It starts on the level of the individual because I tell you about mama and daddy are broken during slavery. And let me tell you how that breaking process happened. Y'all know how Willie Lynch explained it. But I want to talk specifically what you do to dehumanize, to denigrate a people to the point where they learn to be helpless. Because you learn helplessness. And the way learned helplessness occurs is tests were done with animal subjects, conditioned response. Skinner, Pavlov, these were people who started to look at conditioned response. And you know much of what has been said about how people were enslaved. Because Malcolm said that you take the chains off their ankles and you put it where? Put it on their minds. You don't ever have to worry about them. Right? And I often give this analogy. This was amazing. My husband and I were up one night. We like to watch the Animal Planet. And we watch all those animals. I know everything about snakes, everything. It's interesting. And this one time I was in the other room and I was hearing, and there was one series where they said when good animals go bad or something. And the little nice foo-foo starts attacking the family and stuff. And they had this one episode of an elephant. It was an African bull elephant in a circus that got done. He said, "You getting off of my back and all y'all getting up out of here." Okay. Elephant went wild, right? Running through, stomping people. I'm done. And then they brought in a zoologist to explain the elephant's behavior. I swear to you, this is what he said. Well, you have to consider, taken from its homeland, chained on a long journey, beaten, treated illy, separated, fed poorly, sick, and then under someone's whip constantly. It's expected that he would do what he did. And I came back out, I'm going, you can see it in an elephant. So it gets reinforced, and part of what happens if you tie an elephant, matter of fact, if you knock a large animal down, they get blown out because nothing can knock them down, right? But if you can stop and chain an elephant, if you can stop it from moving against its will, and you're not an elephant, that elephant learns helplessness. They will chain, and now to this day, you can actually walk into different, where there are circuses, and they'll have zookeepers, and they'll have all these different people that'll be working with different areas of the animals, little circus folks. And you'll see the elephants standing next to the chains. Chain's not on the elephant, but it's so used to being chained, it won't move. Matter of fact, you can tie a thread around it, and it won't move because it doesn't believe it can move. So learned helplessness is a process of, after a while, you hear it over and over again that you are dysfunctional, that you are backwards, that you are underachieving, and you're not making benchmarks. You are all of those things over again. You begin to believe it's true. That's what, in Wrightsville, Iowa, what Jane Elliott proved by Brown Eyes, Blue Eyes in the course of 2 weeks. Changed the scores permanently. The score was changed permanently academically for those children who believed they were on top and those that believed they were on the bottom. So what we have to understand is, I think probably, the last 400 years has been one hell of a conditioning for us. And that self-hatred, I heard a brother say to me yesterday, we have to love ourselves enough so that we can outlove how much we hate ourselves. And so we have to get to a point where we understand how we came to do this. So how does it look? Let me give you this example because you all know about it. If you're in a bank, you're about my age. No, you got to be younger than me because I'm not going to be standing in line that long. But let's say you are in your 30s and you're looking at a woman or a man in their 30s and they have small children and their children are where in proximity to them in the bank? It's small children, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. They're actually really very close to you. Very close, so close, in fact, they're touching you sometimes, holding on to your leg. And as you move, they move, all in lockstep together, the whole crew. It's a very unusual sight, but we see it every day. And if the child, and again, I teach human development, and it's normal for children to move about and stray. That's how they learn. There's a certain thing called secure attachment and insecure attachment. And a child that has secure attachment will wander about and talk to people and feel safe. But if our children move, get over here. You'll see it, that little child, just a little bit to the right, child can't move. Well, I started to do the research, so I would ask, the mother why that child don't need to be running around the bank. Okay. Meanwhile, same bank, white mother, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Honey, come. Oh, no, don't leave that man alone. Put that down. Child is swinging on the little ropes and sliding down the aisles and running up and down and talking to you, annoying everybody in the bank. And the mother's just gently going, oh, no, run. Same bank. Other child, get your, right? Now, there's something going on in that dynamic. One of the dynamics is that this mother is behaving this way, and everyone, is watching. the little white kids are looking at the little black kids. There's two things going on. It's going both ways. The black kid is learning, oh, he can run, and she can run and play, but I'll get in trouble. And the white kid learns, they must not be able to run and play. I wonder why they got to stay over there. What's wrong with them? There are messages being sent, right? So now children are going to stay and be obedient to their parents. So when the mother, of course, or father gets to the bank teller, kids are lower than the counter. I've watched this. I'm not making this up. So the children will still try to explore because it is part of their task of human development to do so. So the child is going to try to escape. It's normal. Child's trying to escape. Mama can't see me. I'm sliding down the aisle. Underneath the little counter, mama doesn't notice, I'm almost free. Some other black people in the line step out the line. Right? They don't know the mother or the father or the children. They give the death stare. Right? So, little kid goes, oh, wow. Get back in line. No, nothing's exchanged. Now we're looking at not just the individual and the family. What is the other level of transmission? Now it's being reinforced on a community level. No words are exchanged. You see, because we've all taught each other that I got to have your back. And I appreciate that. But what we're doing is we are crippling our children. In so doing, not a word is transmitted. And that's why it can't happen when people say, well, can you? Because they'd love for post-traumatic slave syndrome to end up in a book somewhere where they can bill it, right? They'd love for you to find a pill to fix it. But post-traumatic slave syndrome cannot be solved in that way because it also implies a need for justice. And that means that it's got to heal on all those levels. We have to not only take ownership of ourselves, but ownership of our communities, right? We have to learn that self-sufficiency. So it is something communicated on a variety of levels, and so as a result of that, we have to deal with it on a variety of levels. We've got to heal the individual, the family, and the community. So I'm going to cover one more thing. I want to talk specifically about the transmission psychologically. What happens to us and what human beings do when they are subject to dehumanization. I often say to people that when someone black has to go to someone white for help, what it does to them. Now it's interesting because, we free, right? But something happens when you're in a position where you know that the person on the other side that you're depending on to help you is a white person, isn't it? I don't care how liberal and open and spiritual you think you are. Something else occurs in that room 2004. If you're trying to get the loan, if you're trying to get the food stamps, whatever it is you're trying to get, the whole dynamic changes when that white person's on the other side, does it not? Right? Because even if there are no words, there's something psychically communicated in that room. And I try to explain to people what happens to a person that has to now go to someone that they distrust and have been taught to distrust for their survival in 2004. Because why should it resonate any particular way? I want to talk specifically about the connection between that dehumanization of men and women during slavery and what it did to our relationships with one another. Black men and black women. It's such an important subject that if we don't begin this discussion, we are going to look at the total destruction of our families. We've got to have this discussion. And what we need to know is that we both, black men and black women, fight a war when we go out there. We're both in it and we're both injured by it. But what we have to resist is a temptation to punish each other for it, because that's what happens. That's what we do. I often talk about the story of my son and the little boy that looked at him and said, what you're looking at, what you're staring at. I talk about that story of this little boy that has so much antipathy for himself that when my son looks at him, it feels threatening to him to such a degree he wants to beat him up. And how in Africa everyone says, "I see you," as a greeting. I talk about that because I saw the disparity and I saw the injury in young boys. Yesterday I heard a young man talk about that. He was about 14, 15 years old and talked about how he saw a young man in the street in Harlem and how just looking at this young man, he wanted to beat him up. He wanted to jump on him. And I didn't have enough time in the day to explain to him all that was going on in that young man, but I do understand what was going on in that young man. I understand why it is respect is so important for black people. Because we've never been respected. I want you to know why we created words like Madea, Big Mama, Big Daddy. Because they didn't call us Mr. and Sir. We created our own names to cling to a sense of nobility. Are you following me? Because we had no value, you see. So we created those terms and those terminologies. And even now some people go, they're ashamed and they get nervous when they hear someone say, "My dear," a big mama. Because I needed you to know that you were great. Because we weren't given titles. Those were only for white people, you see. So one of the things that we have to understand is what that dehumanization produced. So on a very fundamental level, we have to understand that women were subjugated on one level, men were subjugated on another. Women were subjugated to never trust their men, to only rely on the master. Now you understand, we never forgot, and we knew how to protect each other. How many of you saw Sankofa, the movie? Okay. You should see that. It's very good. And the discussion is important because in this movie, there is a situation that happens where there's two young slaves. A woman is about 8 months pregnant. And they don't want their baby born into slavery, so they're going to run away. Well, they're caught by the overseers. And so to make a lesson of them, they call all the slaves together and they beat her. But they don't let just anybody beat her. They ask the black overseer to beat her. And he beats her to death. This is someone that was like his sister that he beats to death. And then the camera shot fades and you see that the woman, the medicine woman, goes in and she delivers that baby because the baby's almost term. And so she takes that baby, and the next scene she's rocking the baby. And the man who beat the girl to death, now you know they all got to go back to living with each other. Are you following me? We all got to go back to the field side by side after you just beat this woman to death who was my wife and my sister. And we have to reconcile that. So he comes in, the man who beat the woman to death, and he goes, "The baby all right? That baby all right?" And the woman says, "The baby gonna be all right, but you can't come around for a while, okay? You can't come around." And I imagine what happens to him, right? Because they understand that he did what he had to do because the gun was trained on him. But you still can't come around for a while. Because we got to heal from what you did. How do you do such a thing? Emasculate him to the point where he beats someone to death that he loves. And then to have to look in the eyes of her parents, the people who loved her. And then to have to accept the love from them to you after having done such an act. What does it do to the human spirit? So what I started to look at is the psychology of the beatings and the rapes, because they were done very methodically. So when you take a woman out of a man's bed, that is his wife. You take him out of her bed, his bed, you take her out and you rape her. Not only do you rape her, you give her, pass her around to some of your friends and their children. And then you say to him before you leave, and she better be good or I'll beat you. I don't know that you can destroy a man any further than that. So she goes away and she comes back and she has two things she's got to do. She's got to take care of her and she's got to take care of him. And somewhere in his mind, he might wonder, did she enjoy that? Somewhere in his mind, he might think, couldn't you have fought him off? And deep down inside, he knows she couldn't. And then she looks over at him and thinks, why couldn't you protect me? Why couldn't you stop this from happening to me? And then in the second thought, she says, I don't want you to feel pain and guilt and disgust of me. And I don't want you to feel shame. So she soils herself again. And so what we have to understand is the psychology of that, because when they get up the next morning and they look at each other, they're not the same people anymore. And still they have to exist that way perpetually, not to mention their children are watching. So when I started to look at the psychology of that, the rape wasn't simply for the rape. It was to make certain that she was submissive and that she knew fully he could do nothing to protect her. Hence, he was always called a boy. That's why my father couldn't handle the term boy. You know, we hear people say, well, me and my boys. My father would turn over in his grave, somebody called him a boy, because he grew up in the South and he knew what that meant. It meant that you were continually confined to adolescence as a grown man. And so when you begin to look at the interaction, now you have 2004. You have a black man that walks into a social service office trying to get some mental health assistance. He happens to be bipolar. That means manic depressive. And he hasn't gotten his meds because he lost his job and he lost his medical coverage, and so he has no medication. So he's a little agitated, okay? He's a little upset, a little paranoid, but he's walked in here with Susie, who came from the suburbs, that got her degree fresh, who's been taught her whole life to be what? Afraid of him. Because what does he want to do to her? He wants to rape her. Now, if you all think I'm exaggerating, there's a book here called 100 Years of Lynching. If you look at the majority of the reasons why folks were lynched after the advent of slavery, it was because of a white woman. He scared her, he upset her, he startled her, he looked at her menacingly, he tripped over her. All of that could cost a black man his life. And so when we look at what has happened to our men, what must we remind each other of? And what happens to that black man that's on, he didn't have his medication, he's a little agitated. He about 6'9". He can't even fit in the chair, but he's trying to look smaller because he doesn't want to what? He doesn't want to upset or frighten her. But she is frightened, isn't she? She is frightened. So he's trying to figure out what he can do. Maybe I better not look at her directly. So I'm going to hold my head down. So in other words, I'm sick and I'm in pain, but I need to take care of you before you can take care of me. And that's what black people do 2004 with white people, and white people don't understand what's going on. It's a fact. It's a fact. So after you see the emasculation of the black man, the deterioration and the soiling of the black woman, how does that move through history? Well, I told you that they gave you those images over and over again. Because after the illusion of slavery and after the black codes and convict lease, then they said something else. They said, you know what? Separate but equal. Jim Crow, segregation. Y'all gonna be treated just as nice as everybody else. It's all gonna be equal. We just want you to be separate. And we said, hallelujah, that's a great thing. And you know, we did pretty well. And we did pretty well because we had to be what? Together. We were interdependent. We couldn't go nowhere else. So now we were dependent on each other. Guess what? We built beautiful towns. We had banks. We had everything we needed. We patronized one another's stores. We went to the same barbershop. We were the teachers, the doctors. We were everything. And then they looked over there and they said, you know, they're prospering. thought the trauma was over. But was the trauma over? Oh no, they burnt those towns to the ground. And very often, what was the reason why it all started? Because of a white woman. Because somebody thought somebody did something to a white. It didn't matter. It was a trumped up charge, and it's in the minds of everyone. Because again, the preoccupation was always with sexuality. It's been there forever. From the moment black men came off the boat, white men were preoccupied with their penises. That's an absolute truth. Absolute truth. And the reason for that had to do with a lot of things, but if you consider the lynchings, what was the first thing to get cut off? Always. And that was sold and put on a mantelpiece. Right? So what we have to understand about this is that these are things that became part of our psyches. Black men, black women, white women. Because we became a reminder of our what? Our weakness. When black men look at black women, it's a reminder of failure. So show me something else. And what happened was during segregation, when we were booming and we were doing well, we could have healed. But we didn't get a chance to heal because they said, we need your money. We don't want you to give to each other. There's so many of you. We could benefit from you. And we would tell you, you know what? We know you have an ice maker, but white men's ice is colder. And we believed it. And we stopped patronizing each other's stores because we bought the notion that if it was white, it was better. And we watched our communities crumble. So when did the trauma stop? So then now we have integration, what we never fully integrated. Look around you. We didn't integrate. And so now when we look at that, we go, well, how can we reinforce, though, 2004, the images? You all remember the 70s, and the 60s, and the platform shoes, and you all remember Superfly, don't you? You know, coffee, you remember that. Sweet, sweet back. Black exploitation, now we're going to sell you the image to you. And we bought that too, including all the fashions which they produced that said and reinforced that this is who you are. So they gained wealth as a result of our pathology about who we were. And they showed it to you over and over and over again. Because for white people, they can't feel the guilt. And the number one that comes out is, I don't want to feel the guilt, but you know what? Don't take my privilege. And so what we have to understand is we've got to take this chain from around us. We have to do it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is alive and well. And if we don't get with it and understand what it looks like between us, so now we have a man and a woman and we're integrated. Now we are up there trying to feel good. I look at, in my book, I talk about something called Never Let Them See You Sweat. And you begin to realize that what black people do to black people. You have somebody, I believe this on a spiritual level, by the way, the first example, the first sign of spiritual evolution and development is to delight in the success of your neighbor. Somebody black, now this is on a community level, they say, yeah, you know, they just bought a house over there. You know, that's an expensive area. They bought that house. Mm-hmm. They ain't gonna keep that house. The only reason why he got the house was because of his, you know what I'm saying? And I started to look at it, the young folks call it hating, right? But I'm telling you the truth. It's so pervasive that it's scary. And I want you to look at it from another level, not out there. I want you to look at it up close and personal. What goes on inside of you? And I want you to get with this on an honest level. You don't have to say it to anybody, but I want you to figure out what resonates inside your body when you hear the success of someone else. I started to pay attention to that. It's not jealousy. It's fear. And it's a fear of being abandoned. And it's what happens every single time. Matter of fact, they'll dog you out. And the moment you fall, they're going to pick you up and love you. Because I just didn't want you to leave me. That's really what it was. I want to love you right here. But when you leave me, when you advance, grow, develop, all that stuff, you're going to abandon me. And when you start looking at the superficial ties that had to happen, think about the fact that you have someone you love on a slave plantation. How attached are you going to be to them? Are you going to have to equip yourself emotionally if one day they're gone from you? How much of your heart are you going to let break? It makes sense that I can't love you too much because I have to be okay if you're gone. It's a duality of reality that no human being should have to deal with, but we're still dealing with it. Or those of us that don't want to be black, we know they're the ones that are Indian. All a sign of the self-hatred, the pathology. That ain't during slavery, isn't it? Isn't that right up? You know them, don't you? Oh, did I mention, yeah, I have a lot of Indian in me. I have people from, So there's that sense. And what we have to understand about that is that pathology moves along. So what do we get reminded of? Now, 2004, you got two people. They went to school. They did the right stuff. They got the little degrees. They, put the little down payment on the house. And all of a sudden, they're living paycheck to paycheck, like everybody else in America is. And they're looking at each other and saying, why can't you be this thing? Well, because white people told us that, now that we're all free, and now that we're all, everything's equal, you should have the 2 cars in the garage and the whole little spread. White people don't have that. But we bought it, and guess who we punished when we couldn't have it? We punished each other. Because she looks at him and says, once again, why can't you protect me? Why can't you make my world safe for me? You're the man. And so he looks for someone that doesn't question that. And so we have to begin to understand that pathology of what we remind each other of, just like that little boy that saw my son and said, what you looking at? It's the same thing. We do it on an adult level. What you looking at, same thing. You think you all that. All of those things are symptoms of a feeling or a degree of dislike for oneself that is more destructive than a war. And it continues. The good hair, the bad hair, all of the things, it's all in the videos, the same stuff. It's over and over and over again. People want their children to pick someone else. They want out of the race. I don't want to look at this black face anymore. Because surely that is the biggest problem there is. Meanwhile, everybody in the world is running, trying to find tans. They're locking their hair. They're trying to manufacture booties. Getting collagen in the lips. Trying to figure out every kind of safe tan there could be. And until they say you're okay and you're beautiful, we don't believe we are. For some reason, J-Lo just gave us permission to have booties. Now it's okay to have one. And I mean that seriously. Those are the things that we have to look at that become part of our pathology, and our children are watching us. Okay? So one of the things that I try to do with the work is not to look at it from a purely philosophical level, but to say, what does it look like up close and personal with a black man and a black woman? I'm married to a black man. I love that black man. And I understand where he is fragile. And I understand what it means to be strong enough to say, I need you. Or I am afraid. And one of the things that we have to understand about what manhood is, because it took me a long time to understand how fragile we all are. Black women fight with their mouths. They fight verbally. No, that's the truth. That's the truth. We can back somebody up off us in a hot second. Right? And it's something that we had to equip ourselves with in order to survive. We would back the white women off. We would back the white men off. We'd back everybody off when we needed to. We knew how to do that. We could take them apart. And if it had to go to the next level, we could do that too. Right? So one of the things that happened, though, with that defense that we developed, that tongue, because I want you to think about this. And I talk often about those words that we say. You know? I know people in families that were treated, Oprah talked about not being treated well because of the color of her skin, knowing which child was favored over the other because they were fairer or whatever. We know what words do right now. The thing that you can bring it up in your body right now. Somebody said to you. It could have been 20 years ago, and it hurts right now. Words in some ways much worse than a sword, because a sword will cut you, but it'll heal. We can't heal from some of those words, and we can't get them back. So when you have a black mother saying to a black son, because she's raising him by herself, most of the time, because when he looks at her, she reminds him of his lack of manhood. And she says to her black son, you get your black ass in here and wash these dishes. Think about that. He's standing in front of his friends when you said that to him. And he loves you and he hates you all at once. But you're tired because you've been working 16 hours and the garbage is spilling over and the dishes are all over the place. I understand it. So how is it that we don't flee from each other? Because that's what we do. We flee from each other. But what we need to know is it okay for me to be vulnerable with you? Are you going to take this vulnerability that I give to you and are you going to beat me up with it? I need to know that it's going to be safe for me to say that I'm really worried about what's going on at work right now. But I don't think I can kiss any white people's behinds any longer. But I know that I am the man and I need to take care of you. Is it okay for me to tell you that? And I think that those are the things but we flee from each other. We flee from each other. And it's amazing. I look at black people as a salt of the earth. Salt of the earth. So post-traumatic slave syndrome is transmitted generationally. It can be healed generationally. It needs to be a community forum that says no longer, just like we give that death stare and we have everybody's back, we have to stop, like I have to stop sometimes, the children in the street and tell them what we believe and who we are. All of us need to do that. And when someone tells you, gosh, that girl is so bright, we don't want to say, yeah, that girl, but she's a mess. And she's so fast, too. No, we need to say, you know what? She is a gift to me. She's beautiful. Collectively, we need to do that. So the healing happens when we are willing to love ourselves beyond how much we've hated ourselves. We have to begin to use the right words, to say the right things, to believe it in our hearts, and to make it evident in our actions. This cannot be something that's lip service. It's not going to happen. White people aren't going to tell you. Matter of fact, they're going to tell you, oh, you don't need to hear any of this. They're going to say, oh, none of that's true. Just make enough money, you'll be fine. And I'll end with this. You know, one of the things, and I said this because Randall Robinson taught me a lot, because I know why Randall quit America. I know why Randall quit. I know that in order for us to understand that we all must be leaders, I need to know that my children are safe with you and that you will tell them the right things. You need to know that your children are safe with me. You need to know when they go to school that the black teacher isn't going to be the one that hurts them. Okay? You got to do that. You got to love our children through this. Randall said that one of the problems with our leadership is that we came as leaders to do good, but we stayed to do well. So we have to hold folks accountable. Hold them accountable. Everything that's black isn't black. And you know, sometimes we twist it. We're not right. And we cannot prop up folks that aren't right. That doesn't mean we destroy them. We just say, you know what, we're going to get you some therapy. We're going to work with you on that, but you can't stand up. You can't have a mic anymore. You can't have the mic. So we have to begin to become skilled and knowledgeable. When the book comes out, you all will read a lot about very practical things. You will learn history, those who don't read the history. Because I folded everything into the book, because I'm thinking if they only read this one book, I want them to get as much in this one book about the scholars, the knowledge that has preceded them. I needed to do that. And to understand that the healing begins with us. It begins today. Today. I'd actually like to end with a prayer today. Oh my God, oh my God. Unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord.
When your time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubt and out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold and own it. Never let go, stand tall and hold tight. Overcoming obstacles is the objective in life. Doubters all the night, and onto them you shine bright. Cause inside your head, on goes the light. Ignite. Plant the intuition upon the stars in the night that glisten. To you they listen, to be you send it a wishing. When your time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubt and out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold.